he didn't just humiliate her. He handed another woman the keys to her wedding car in front of everyone and smiled like he'd done something kind. Serena Vale stood there in her wedding gown, bouquet in hand, and watched Damen Viscari help his childhood best friend climb into the white Rolls Royce, decorated with her orchids, wearing her reception dress, while hundreds of guests laughed and filmed. And Damen turned to Serena and said, "It's just a car, baby. Don't make this weird." If that had been you standing there in the dress you dreamed about on the day you'd planned for 2 years, what would you have done? Because what Serena did next, nobody saw coming. The morning of her wedding, Serena Vale burned her toast. It was a small thing, ridiculous even, to remember it later. The smell of scorched bread in her hotel suite at 6:15 in the morning, the fire alarm chirping twice before the smoke cleared in her maid of honor, Claudette, waving a folded magazine at the smoke detector while muttering something colorful in French. Serena had laughed, a real laugh, the unguarded kind that scrunches your nose and makes you forget you've spent 40 minutes on your makeup. That laugh felt like another life by noon. She had not gone into this marriage blindly. She was 34 years old. She had buried a business partner who stole from her, survived a lawsuit that nearly took her savings, and spent 3 years quietly turning Damen Viscari's legitimate hospitality fronts into something that actually turned a profit. She was not a woman who confused a man's charm with his character. She believed she knew Damien's character, or at least she had believed that until the morning of her wedding, when he proved that the version of him she'd fallen in love with had always been a costume he wore for her benefit. The Rolls Royce had been Damien's idea. He'd shown her the photo 6 months earlier, sliding his phone across the dinner table with that half-smile she had never quite been able to resist. Custom white exterior, 10,000 white orchids wrapped around the hood and roof, interior lined with Italian cream leather. He'd pointed at it and said, "Only the best for you." And she had felt something embarrassingly warm move through her chest, because Damen Viscari did not say things like that to everyone. She had watched enough women try to earn that sentence from him to understand its weight. She should have known, maybe, that a man who makes you feel special for receiving what should be ordinary is a man who has been making you compete without telling you the rules. But she didn't know that yet. Not on the morning of her wedding. She knew it by noon. Bianca Moretti arrived at the hotel at 11:15. Serena heard her before she saw her. That particular kind of laughter that fills a hallway whether you want it to or not. Bright and carrying. The laugh of a woman who has never once in her life worried about taking up too much space. Bianca had that quality. She walked into rooms and rooms reorganized themselves around her. Serena had always told herself this didn't bother her. She had told herself this so many times over 4 years that she had almost stopped noticing she was telling herself anything at all. Bianca and Damien had grown up 3 houses apart in a neighborhood in South Boston that no longer existed the way they remembered it. They had been inseparable at 8 years old and inseparable at 38. And everyone who moved through the outer circle of the Viscari world understood implicitly that Bianca Moretti occupied a category that had no name and required no explanation. She was Bianca. That was sufficient. Serena had met her on the 3rd date with Damien. Bianca had shown up at the restaurant uninvited, slid into the booth beside Damen without asking, ordered a drink, and spent 45 minutes talking exclusively to him while Serena sat across the table and tried to decide whether she was witnessing a boundary violation or a cultural ritual she didn't yet understand. Afterward, Damen had squeezed Serena's hand in the parking lot and said she's just like that. She doesn't mean anything by it. Serena had nodded. She had filed it somewhere in the back of her mind, under things to revisit. And then, because she was a woman who preferred to be fair before she was suspicious, she had given Bianca 18 more months of benefit of the doubt. The benefit of the doubt had compounded no interest. She heard it through the door first. Claudette had gone to get coffee, which meant Serena was alone in the suite when the voices in the hallway rose in pitch. Bianca's laugh, and then Damien's lower register, and then something that sounded like applause, small and scattered. The way people clap when they're surprised and delighted by something unexpected. Serena opened the door. The hallway outside was crowded with members of Damien's inner circle. His lieutenant Marco, two cousins she recognized from family dinners, a handful of men whose names she'd never learned because Damen always seemed faintly reluctant to introduce her. They were all watching Bianca, who stood in the center of the corridor wearing something ivory and floor-length that it took Serena a full 4 seconds to recognize. It was the reception dress. Her reception dress. The gown Serena had spent 11 weeks designing with a seamstress in Milan. The one that was supposed to be her second look of the evening. The dress that represented the version of herself she wanted to step into after the ceremony was done. It had a specific cut to the neckline that she'd sketched herself. A particular way the fabric moved, details so deliberate they were almost private. Bianca was wearing it, and she looked beautiful in it. Serena would be honest with herself about this, later in the months that followed. Bianca was built differently, broader in the shoulders, and the dress pulled in ways the seamstress had not accounted for. But none of that mattered to the men in the hallway, who were whistling and filming on their phones. "You look like a bride," Marco said, grinning. Bianca threw her head back and said that's the idea. Damen, standing at the edge of the group with his jacket over one arm and his shirt already perfectly pressed, caught Serena's eye across the crowd. He did not look alarmed. He smiled. Not the private smile he gave her sometimes, the one that felt like it existed only in the few inches between them. This was the performative smile, the one he wore when he wanted a room to see that he was at ease. He raised his chin slightly in her direction, a greeting, casual, the kind you'd give someone across a parking lot, and then turned back to Bianca. "Tell me you're not wearing that in the car," one of the cousins said. "Why not?" Bianca turned sideways to look at her own silhouette. "I've always wanted to know what it feels like to be a bride." The corridor filled with laughter again. Serena stood in the doorway of her suite and felt the floor shift slightly beneath her feet, the way it does when your brain understands something, before the rest of you is ready to. She told herself it was going to be fine. She told herself this with the same focused conviction she used when reviewing quarterly projections that didn't add up, the deliberate suspension of panic until she had all the relevant information. She went back inside. She sat down at the vanity. She looked at her own reflection in the way you look at a stranger you're trying to read, cataloging the details. The carefully set hair, the dress she actually was wearing, the earrings that had belonged to her grandmother and that she had carried across 3 states to be here today. She told herself Bianca would change. She told herself it was a joke that had gotten slightly out of hand. She told herself Damen would come in and explain. He came in 12 minutes later. He closed the door behind him, and for a moment he just looked at her with an expression she recognized from the time she had miscounted a margin, and he'd had to explain the error without making her feel foolish. Patient, pre-explanatory. "She just wants to feel part of the day," he said. "She's wearing my dress, Damien. It's just a dress. You have the wedding gown." He crossed to where she was sitting, put both hands on her shoulders, met her eyes in the mirror. "You look incredible. You know that." She looked at his hands on her shoulders, the hands of a man who had rebuilt an empire from a reputation and a handshake, the hands that had been the last thing she'd held on to through the 3 in the morning moments when she questioned whether any of this made sense. "The car," she said quietly. "Will she be in the car with us?" There was a pause, less than 2 seconds, but she had known Damien long enough to understand that a 2-second pause before an answer was not a pause for thought. It was a pause for management. "Actually," he said, "I wanted to talk to you about that." What he said next, she would replay in the weeks that followed with the specific cruelty of a mind that can't stop touching a bruise. He said Bianca had mentioned jokingly. He was careful to say jokingly that she had always wondered what it felt like to arrive in a bridal car. Just the experience of it, the entrance, the moment. He said it would mean a lot to her. He said it was just a car, and they would laugh about it later, and it wasn't worth creating tension on a day that was supposed to be about joy. He said, "You've always been so good about Bianca. That's one of the things I love most about you." Serena looked at his face in the mirror for a long time. She had spent 4 years being good about Bianca. She had eaten dinners that Bianca interrupted. She had rescheduled vacations when Bianca had a crisis. She had listened with steady patience while Damen explained again and again that Bianca meant no harm and required extra grace because her childhood had been difficult and her emotions ran close to the surface. Serena had given that grace every time, not because she was a saint, but because she loved Damien. And she had genuinely believed that her patience was building something real between them. Now she understood what it had actually been building. Permission. So I should take another car, she said. He squeezed her shoulders. It will be a great story. She nodded slowly. He kissed the top of her head, told her she was perfect, and left. She sat alone at the vanity for 4 minutes. She counted them. She looked at her own eyes in the mirror, and she breathed through her nose the way her mother had taught her to do when she was small, and the world felt like too much. Then she picked up her bouquet, straightened her spine, and walked out into a day that had already decided what it was going to be. She saw it from the hotel entrance. The Rolls Royce had been moved to the front. The orchids caught the midday light in a way that was genuinely breathtaking. She registered this the way you register beauty even in the middle of devastation, because some things are simply true regardless of context. Damien stood beside the open rear door. Bianca stood beside Damien, and she was still wearing the reception dress, and she had added Serena's bridal veil. Serena did not know when this had happened, did not know who had provided it, only that it now framed Bianca's face while Bianca held a phone at arm's length and filmed herself laughing. The soldiers applauded. Damen's mother, a small and precise woman named Eleonora, who had always treated Serena with a particular brand of warmth that contains no actual heat, stood to one side and smiled at Bianca, with an expression Serena had never once received from her. It was not a performance. It was genuine. It was the smile of a woman watching the girl she had always hoped her son would choose. Damen helped Bianca into the car. He did it the way he was supposed to help Serena. Hand at her elbow, the slight bow of his head, the attention of a man who wants the gesture to be seen. He closed the door. He straightened up. He turned around. And somewhere in the crowd behind him, Serena was standing, and he found her, and he gave her the patient look again. "There's a town car around the side," he said quietly, coming toward her. "You'll come in maybe 10 minutes after. Give Bianca her moment at the entrance." "Give Bianca her moment at the entrance," she repeated. "Serena, at my wedding," he lowered his voice. "Don't do this right now." She didn't do anything right now. She looked at him, really looked the way she had not allowed herself to look in a long time, stripping away the hope she had been spreading over the truth like a coat of paint. And she saw that he genuinely did not understand why she was struggling. He had made what seemed to him like a reasonable accommodation for someone he cared about, and he needed Serena to agree that it was reasonable, because Serena agreeing was what Serena did. "Okay," she said. Relief moved across his face immediately. "Thank you." "I knew you'd understand," he said. "Your car is waiting." He touched her arm briefly, started to say something else, and then Marco called from the direction of the motorcade, and the moment splintered. He was gone. Serena watched the Rolls Royce pull away. She watched Bianca's hand appear from the rear window, waving to the crowd, the veil streaming behind her. Then Serena walked around the side of the hotel, got into the ordinary black sedan, and pulled up her phone to order a rideshare because there was no town car. She had known, even as he said it, that there was no town car. That detail had been invented in the moment to make the ask feel smaller, the way all of his asks had always been packaged to feel smaller than they were. The rideshare driver arrived in 4 minutes. He had a pine tree air freshener and a podcast playing quietly about compound interest. He asked her if she was going to a wedding. "I was supposed to," she said. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror, saw the gown, and apparently decided this was not a conversation he was equipped for. He turned the podcast up slightly and drove. Serena looked out the window at the city moving past her and understood with a clarity that felt less like insight and more like the end of a long illness that she had not been a partner in this relationship. She had been an audience, a very patient, very capable audience who had mistaken the front row seat for a starring role. She did not cry. She wanted to in the way that you want relief when something has been pressing on your chest for a very long time. But the tears did not come yet. What came instead was something quieter and more absolute. She began to think. The church was 20 minutes away. In those 20 minutes, while Bianca's social media posts filled the feeds of 300 guests with images of herself in the wedding car, in the veil, in the reception dress beside the orchids, laughing with Damien in the frame, Serena sat in the back of a stranger's car and made exactly two decisions. The first decision was the one she made for herself. The second decision was the one she made for every woman who had ever been told that loving someone meant disappearing gracefully while they chose someone else, and then being thanked for your flexibility. She did not tell the driver to turn around. She told him to keep going. And then she opened her clutch, took out the small notepad she always carried because she had never trusted herself to keep every important thought only in her phone, and she began to write. Not a letter, not yet. Just a list. Every time, every cancellation, every she means well and she doesn't understand limits. And you've always been so good about it. Every dinner interrupted, every vacation postponed, every moment she had swallowed her own discomfort and packaged it as patience because she loved a man who needed her to be easy. She filled 3 pages before the car stopped. When she looked up, they were at the hotel, the ceremony venue, the place where in approximately 40 minutes she was supposed to stand beside Damen Viscari and promise him things with her voice and her name. And whatever remained of the self she had been slowly handing over for years in small, graceful increments. She sat for a moment with the notepad in her hands. Then she folded the pages carefully, tucked them inside her bouquet where they wouldn't be visible, and got out of the car. She had somewhere to be, but it was not where Damen thought. The hotel suite they had reserved for the bridal party was on the 14th floor, and by the time Serena reached it, Claudette was there with the coffee and a look on her face that said she had already heard something and was bracing herself to be professional about it. Don't, Serena said quietly, taking the coffee. I'm not saying anything. Your face is saying something. Claudette sat down on the edge of the bed. She was a precise, loyal woman who had organized 12 events for Serena over 6 years, and who understood by long experience that Serena Vale did not want comfort before she wanted clarity. What do you need? My phone charger and about 20 minutes where nobody comes in. Done. Claudette left. Serena locked the door. She sat in the silence with her wedding dress and her coffee and the 3 pages she had written in the back of a stranger's car. And she thought about her grandmother's earrings and the toast she had burned that morning and the specific sound of Bianca's laughter in that hotel corridor. And Damen's 2-second pause before he told her there was a town car. She thought about the list. Every item on it was true. She had not exaggerated. She had not dramatized. She was not someone who needed to exaggerate pain to take it seriously. Every item was simply true. And when you lay them all out in sequence, without the individual explanations and the ambient affection that had colored each moment in isolation, the pattern was clear. She had been patient for so long that her patience had become the foundation of something she had not agreed to build. She sat down the coffee. She reached for her phone and saw 37 notifications. And at the top of the stack, a message from Damien sent 14 minutes ago that read, "Where are you? Guests are asking. Don't make a scene today, please." She set the phone down, picked up the notepad, tore out a single page, not the list, but a blank page in the back, and wrote 7 words in her own handwriting. She looked at the words for a long time. Then she got up, went to the closet, and took out the suitcase she had not unpacked since arriving 2 days ago, because old habit had kept her from fully settling into a place she had only been borrowing. She began to fold the wedding dress with the careful attention of someone who understands that beautiful things deserve to be handled gently, even when you are done with them. Outside, through the window, she could hear the city the way you hear it from 14 floors up, compressed and distant, an abstraction of lives moving forward. Somewhere in this hotel, guests were finding their seats. Somewhere, Bianca was still posting photos. Somewhere, Damien was standing at the head of an aisle, waiting for a woman he believed he understood. Serena placed her grandmother's earrings back in their velvet pouch. She slid her engagement ring off her left hand and held it for a moment. Not dramatically, not with any particular ceremony, just looking at it, the way you look at something you valued before it became evidence, and set it in the center of the ring box on the vanity. She placed the 7-word note beside it. She picked up her suitcase. She paused at the door of the suite, 14 floors up, white dress folded in a bag, 4 years of her life reduced to a single piece of paper and a returned ring. And she felt the full weight of what she was doing move through her the way that real things do. Not cleanly, not neatly, with a grief that was genuine and a certainty that was stronger. Then she opened the door. She walked down the corridor toward the service elevator because the main lobby was full of wedding guests. And she was not interested in making an exit that anyone could photograph. She pressed the button. She waited. The elevator opened. She stepped in, and the doors closed behind her, and she exhaled a breath she had apparently been holding for approximately 4 years outside the hotel. It was a clear afternoon. Ordinary traffic. A bus pulling away from a stop across the street. 2 pigeons arguing about something on the edge of a fountain. Serena Vale walked out of the front entrance of a hotel where her wedding was about to not happen. Got into the second rideshare of the afternoon and gave the driver an address nobody was going to look for. She did not look back at the building, not because it didn't hurt, but because she had written her grandmother's most important piece of advice on that little notepad page once years ago when she was young enough to write things down she didn't yet understand. A woman who knows her own value doesn't need to argue her case. She understood it now. The ring box sat on the vanity for 11 minutes before anyone found it. It was Marco who walked into the suite first, sent by Damien to check why Serena hadn't appeared at the entrance of the ballroom, where 240 guests were now seated and beginning to murmur. Marco had done many things for Damen Viscari over 17 years. He had delivered messages that could not be written down. He had stood outside hospital rooms at 3 in the morning. He had once spent 6 hours in a parking garage waiting for a conversation that lasted 4 minutes. He considered himself a man who was difficult to rattle. He picked up the ring box, saw what was inside, and stood very still for a moment. Then he saw the note. He read it twice. Not because it was long, it was 7 words, but because the first time he read it, something in his brain refused to process the information and made him start over. He took out his phone and called Damien. Damien didn't answer. He was standing at the altar with the officiant, and his phone was in his jacket pocket, on silent because Serena had asked him 3 weeks ago to please keep it on silent during the ceremony, so they could be present, and he had agreed. And the particular irony of this would not occur to him until much later. Marco called again. Then he sent a text that said only come to suite 1408 now. Then he sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at the ring in its box and the 7 words on the paper beside it and felt with a certainty he had no language. For that something had broken today that was not going to be fixed by a conversation. Damien read the text during what would have been the processional. He had felt his phone vibrate once, twice, then the specific rhythm of a 3rd attempt that Marco only used when something required immediate attention. He had excused himself from the altar with a murmured word to the officiant and stepped into the anteroom beside the ballroom entrance where the light was different and the sound of the string quartet playing the processional came through the wall like something from another world. He read Marco's text. He stood very still in the way of a man whose brain is moving very fast, while his body has temporarily gone offline. Then he walked to the elevator. He did not run. Damen Viscari had not run toward anything in 15 years. Running communicated panic, and panic communicated weakness, and weakness in his world was an invitation. He walked at a pace that was slightly faster than his normal walk, and he kept his face arranged in a neutral expression, and he nodded at 2 guests he passed in the corridor as if he had somewhere to be that was not unusual. The elevator took 40 seconds. It felt like considerably longer. Marco stood when Damien came in, which was something he didn't usually do, and that alone told Damen something about the weight of what was in the room. He saw the ring box first. He saw the note second. He picked up the note. The way you pick up something you already know is going to hurt you with the particular carefulness of someone trying to maintain control over a moment that has already escaped control. And he read the 7 words. A woman should never compete for her own place. He read it a second time. Marco said nothing. He had the specific intelligence of a man who understood that some moments required presence and not commentary. Damen set the note down. He looked at the ring in the box. He looked at the folded wedding dress on the chair by the window. She had folded it. He registered this. She had taken the time to fold it carefully, which meant this had not been an impulse, which meant she had known, had decided, had planned, and something shifted in his chest in a way he was not prepared for and did not have a name for immediately. When, he said. I don't know. She was here when I brought coffee up around 1. That was 40 minutes ago. Does anyone else know? No. Keep it that way. He put the ring box in his jacket pocket. He folded the note once and put it in the same pocket. He stood in the center of the suite for a moment, with his hands in his pockets and his jaw set, and his eyes moving around the room in the methodical way of someone conducting an inventory. Her luggage gone. Car service. I called. Nobody booked under her name. She has a phone. She's not answering. Damen exhaled through his nose. It was a small sound, contained and controlled, and if you didn't know him, you wouldn't have heard anything in it at all. Marco knew him. There are 240 people in that ballroom, Marco said. I'm aware. Damien, I heard you. He walked to the window and looked out at the city, the way Serena had looked out at it an hour ago, though he didn't know that. And the view meant something entirely different to him. The streets below represented infrastructure, territory, the organized geography of an empire he had built and maintained by never losing his footing. He had lost his footing today. He wasn't ready to examine how or why. He was still in the part where you locate the breach and stop the bleeding. Tell the officiant there's a delay, he said finally. Medical issue. Keep it vague. Give me 30 minutes, and if she doesn't come back... 30 minutes, Marco. Marco left. Damen stood alone in the suite where his bride had packed her things and disappeared, and he called her number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He stood with the phone against his ear after the 3rd attempt and listened to her recorded voice, ask him to leave a message, and felt for the first time in a very long time, completely without a move. Downstairs, Bianca had not changed out of the reception dress. She had come back from the Rolls Royce entrance, flushed with the particular energy of someone who has been the center of attention and found it suited them. Her phone full of footage she was already reviewing as she moved through the lobby, pausing to show Marco's cousin a clip of herself waving from the car window, laughing at the way the veil had caught the wind. She found out Serena was gone the way she found out most things. Not from Damien directly, but from the atmospheric shift in the men around him. She had known Damen's world long enough to read it the way some people read weather, the way the energy in a room changes before a storm becomes visible. She found Damien in the corridor outside the suite. What happened? He looked at her. She was still wearing Serena's dress. He registered this fact now with an expression that had nothing performative in it. Just a long, flat look that she had rarely received from him and which landed somewhere uncomfortable. She left, he said. Bianca was quiet for a beat. Left. Gone. Bag gone. Ring on the vanity. Bianca absorbed this. She had a gift for making her face unreadable when she needed to. A skill she had developed over years of navigating spaces where showing too much of your reaction was a liability. She'll come back, she said. She's upset. She'll calm down. And her attorney called me 3 minutes ago. That stopped her. She called her attorney, Damen said, before she left the building. She is not calming down somewhere. She is not taking a walk. She planned this, Bianca. His voice was even controlled, which was somehow worse than if he'd raised it. She planned this before we got to the car this morning. Bianca opened her mouth. Don't, he said, not loudly, just with a finality that closed the space before she could fill it. She looked at him. He looked at her, and for the first time in the considerable history of their friendship, something passed between them that was not warmth and was not ease. It was accountability, arriving late and uncomfortable, the way it always does when you've been avoiding it long enough. I just wanted, she started. I know what you wanted, Bianca. He ran one hand across his jaw. I always know what you want. That's the problem. That's been the problem. She took a breath. You're blaming me. I'm not blaming you. He said it with the weariness of a man who has run this particular calculation 100 times and arrived at a result he doesn't like. I made every choice. I know that. But I'm standing in an empty room where my fiancé should be, and you're standing in front of me in her dress, and I need you to understand something. He waited until she met his eyes. She left me a note with 7 words. 7 words, Bianca, and every single one of them is something I should have said to her myself and never did. Bianca looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face that might have been guilt, or might have been something older and more complicated than guilt. The kind of feeling that doesn't have a clean name because it's made up of too many other feelings pressed together over too many years. I'm sorry, she said, and she sounded for once like she meant it. Yeah, he said. Me too. He walked back into the suite and closed the door. The guests were told there had been a medical situation within the wedding party. They were asked to help themselves to cocktails and appetizers in the adjacent lounge, and most of them did because people at catered events are generally willing to accept a delay when the drinks are good and the food is free. A murmur went through the room, layered and complex, the way murmurs do in spaces where many people share a context, and none of them have the complete picture. Damen's mother found Marco in the lounge and pulled him to a corner with the grip of a woman who has spent 50 years understanding that information is currency. Where is she? Eleonora Viscari asked. Marco gave her the look he gave people when he was not authorized to answer. Marco, Mrs. Viscari. Damien is not available. I'm not asking Damien. I'm asking you. Where is the girl? She's not here. Eleonora was quiet for a moment. She had the particular stillness of someone absorbing news they considered on some level inevitable. She straightened the bracelet on her wrist, a slow, deliberate adjustment that was not really about the bracelet. He'll find her, she said. Mrs. Viscari. He always does. Marco said nothing. Eleonora looked at him with the level eyes of a woman who had outlasted many difficult things and expected to outlast this one too. Tell him his mother is here when he's ready. She walked back toward the lounge, and Marco watched her go, and thought that she sounded less like a mother concerned about her son, and more like a woman confirming a predictable outcome in a situation she had never fully opposed. By 4:15 in the afternoon, the video was online. Someone from the hotel staff, no one ever determined exactly who, had uploaded 16 seconds of footage to a short-form video platform. It showed the front entrance of the hotel, the white Rolls Royce, the orchids catching the light, and Damen Viscari physically stepping in front of his bride, one hand raised in a casual stopping gesture, while Bianca Moretti moved past both of them toward the open car door. It showed Damen turning back to Serena with a smile. It showed Serena standing with her bouquet very still, and then the car door closing on Bianca and Damien walking around to the other side, and Serena not moving, and the motorcade beginning to pull away, while she stood there alone on the hotel steps in her wedding dress. 16 seconds. By 5 o'clock it had 400,000 views. By 6 it had crossed 2 million. The comments filled with the specific outrage that internet audiences reserve for moments that feel both personal and universal. The particular fury of people who recognize something from their own lives in someone else's humiliation. The comment section ran like a river. She just stood there. And did he really just stop her from getting in her own car? And the look on her face. I can't stop watching the look on her face. Serena's face in the 16 seconds was not crying. It was not dramatic. It was doing something more difficult. It was staying composed while something behind the eyes went somewhere very far away. It was the face of a woman deciding something. The internet understood this instinctively. Even the people who couldn't have articulated what they understood. By 7 o'clock, the phrase Mafia wedding that never happened was trending in 4 cities. Damen found out about the video from Marco, who sent him the link with no additional comment at 5:47. He watched it on his phone, standing in the hotel suite that smelled faintly of Serena's perfume, and the burned-out optimism of a morning that had gone catastrophically sideways. He watched it twice. The second time he watched it, he watched his own face. He watched himself put his hand up to stop her. He watched himself smile at Bianca. He watched himself turn back to Serena with the patient, reassuring expression of a man who believed he was managing a situation smoothly. He watched Serena stand there. He turned the phone off. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed, the same bed Marco had sat on when he found the ring, and put his phone face down on the duvet and looked at the middle distance for a considerable time. His phone began to vibrate with calls he wasn't going to answer. 3 from business partners, 1 from a man named Greco, who operated out of Philadelphia, and with whom Damen had a meeting scheduled for the following Thursday. That now seemed remote in the way that all scheduled future events feel remote when the present is disintegrating. 1 from a number he didn't recognize that turned out, when he finally checked the voicemail, to be a producer from a news program, and then a call from Bianca, which he let go to voicemail, and then a second call from Bianca, which he also let go. He did not call Serena again, not because he didn't want to. He had reached for the phone 4 times in the last hour with the specific muscle memory intention of calling her, but because her attorney had sent a very brief and very clearly worded email at 4:30 that ended with my client requests that all further communication be directed through this office. My client. Serena Vale had made herself a client before the cocktail hour was over. He understood with the clarity that arrives too late and feels like standing in cold water that she had not left in anger. Anger was something you came back from. Anger spent itself and left an opening. This was something else. This was a decision that had been made with the full cognitive capacity of a woman who had been thinking clearly for a very long time about what she would do when she finally chose to stop pretending. He had mistaken her patience for accommodation. He saw now that it had been evidence. The guests left by 8. The caterers began breaking down the reception space that had never hosted a reception. Servers stacked plates that had been fully set and fully unnecessary. Someone rolled the wedding cake, 5 tiers, white fondant, pale gold, detailing on a cart toward the freight elevator. And the absurdity of this image, this enormous, beautiful object moving silently through a service corridor on its way to nowhere, landed on Marco with a force that surprised him. He found Damien in the bar off the lobby at 8:40, sitting alone at a corner table with a glass of something he wasn't drinking. His jacket folded over the chair beside him, his tie loosened in the specific way of a man who has given up on the formality of the day without taking the step of actually removing it. Marco sat down across from him. He didn't say anything. Damien didn't say anything. The bartender refilled Damen's glass without being asked, which was the professional equivalent of a sympathetic look, and retreated to a respectful distance. Greco called, Marco said eventually. I know. Antonelli's people reached out too just to confirm Thursday is still on. It's not. Marco absorbed this. I'll call them. Do that. Silence again. The video, Marco said. I watched it. 4 million now. Damen turned the glass in a slow circle on the table. Good for them. Damien. Marco waited until he looked up. What do you want to do? It was the question Marco asked when a situation required a decision, and the shape of the decision was going to determine everything downstream of it. Damien had answered it many times in many rooms, in many conditions worse than this on paper. He had always known the answer before Marco finished asking. He didn't know the answer tonight. I don't know, he said. He said it with the flat honesty of a man who doesn't have the energy remaining for any other register. First time in a long time, I genuinely don't know. Marco nodded slowly. Outside the bar window, the city was doing what cities do. Indifferent, continuous, full of people moving through their own evenings. Somewhere in it, Serena Vale was doing something. Damien didn't know what. He didn't know where. He had the resources to find out. He had people whose specific function was finding out things like this. But the attorney's email sat in his phone like a line drawn in concrete, and crossing it would be a choice with consequences that were not the same consequences as the choices he'd made before. He was a man who understood consequences. He had built a life on understanding them. She planned it before we got to the car, he said quietly. Not to Marco, really, to the room, or to himself, or to the glass he wasn't drinking. She knew. She came down those steps already decided. And I stood in front of her and told her to take another car, and I smiled and she said okay, and I thought I had handled it. Marco said nothing. 17 years, Damen said, and nobody has ever made me feel like a fool. I did it to myself today, and I didn't even know it was happening until I was watching it on a phone screen at 5 in the afternoon. He picked up his glass, finally drank, set it back down. Find out where she's staying, he said. Don't contact her. Don't send anyone. Just find out. And then I need to think. Marco stood, buttoned his jacket out of long habit, and left. He thought about 7 words written in handwriting he knew, as well as his own, and about a woman who had spent 4 years being patient while he spent 4 years mistaking her patience for an unlimited resource. He thought about the way she had said okay when he told her to take another car, how still her face had been, how he had walked away relieved. He hadn't seen it. That was the thing he kept arriving at. The fact he kept turning over. He had stood 2 feet from her, and he had not seen what was actually happening in her face because he hadn't been looking. He'd been looking at the logistics, the optics, Bianca's mood, the morning timeline. He had looked at everything in the situation except the person in it who mattered most. He had not seen her for 4 years, and in the end, he had not been looking. His phone lit up on the table. A text from Bianca. I heard about the video. I'm so sorry, Damien. I didn't know it would go this far. Can we talk? He looked at the text for a long time. Then he turned the phone face down. Outside, a car with its windows down passed the hotel at a speed slightly above the limit. Music coming out of it loud enough to hear through the glass. Something with a driving bass line that didn't care about the evening at all. That existed entirely in its own forward motion. Damien watched it go. And somewhere across the city, in an address he didn't yet know, Serena Vale sat in a room that was quiet and small and entirely her own. And she was not waiting, and she was not hoping, and she was not looking at her phone. She was writing in her notepad. Not a list this time, a plan. The plan filled 6 pages by midnight. Serena had always been a list maker, a margin writer, a woman who thought better with a pen in her hand than with her eyes closed in the dark. The room she had checked into, under her mother's maiden name, was a mid-range extended stay hotel 11 blocks from the venue where her wedding had failed to happen. Chosen specifically because it was the kind of place nobody from Damien's world would think to look, not because it was hidden, but because it was ordinary, and the Viscari orbit had very little experience with ordinary. The room had beige walls and a laminate desk and a heating unit that cycled on with a sound like a cough every 20 minutes. And Serena had sat at that desk since 9 o'clock with her notepad and her phone and the particular focused energy of a woman who has been redirecting grief into logistics. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. The plan had 3 phases. The first was extraction, removing her name, her financial contribution, and her creative ownership from every legitimate business she had helped Damien build over 4 years. This was not as simple as it sounded. Her attorney, a precise and unsentimental woman named Harriet Bloom, who operated out of a midtown office and who had been quietly advising Serena for 8 months on a range of matters that now felt extraordinarily prescient, had sent a preliminary outline at 10:15. The outline was 7 pages. It covered 4 hospitality properties, 2 licensing agreements, 1 pending trademark application that bore Serena's creative signature so thoroughly that contesting it would require Damen's legal team to argue in court that she had not designed what she had demonstrably designed. The second phase was financial isolation. Serena had never fully merged her finances with Damien's, and this fact, which he had occasionally described as a sign of her emotional distance, turned out to be the decision that kept her solvent at the end of a day that had cost her everything else. She had accounts he didn't know about, not because she had been hiding them, but because he had never asked. He had paid for the wedding. She had paid for her own life quietly, continuously in the background of a relationship where she had been expected to show up fully while leaving the smallest possible footprint. The third phase she had only outlined in fragments. It was the one that required the most from her, the one that was less about dismantling the old life than about constructing something from the rubble. She had written pastry and then the Marchetti space on Delancey, and then a number that represented the sum in her private account that was more than people thought she had and less than what she would need and approximately right for a woman willing to work 18-hour days, for the first year. She had circled the number. Then she had put the pen down and looked at the ceiling for a while. The heating unit coughed. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen, which had smelled of anise and burnt sugar and something ineffable that she had spent 15 years trying to reproduce in professional kitchens without ever quite getting right. Her grandmother had run a small pastry operation out of her home in Providence for 31 years and had never once described it as a business. She called it her place. The specific possessive had always stayed with Serena. Not the business, not the shop, but her place. As if the defining feature was not what it produced, but who it belonged to. She wanted a place, her own place, not attached to a man's name or a man's empire or a man's idea of what she was useful for. She wrote my name only at the bottom of the page and underlined it twice. Then she turned the notepad face down, set her phone to Do Not Disturb, and slept for the first time in what felt like a very long time. She slept deeply and without dreaming, which was the sleep of someone who has finally made a decision, and woke at 6:17 to the sound of the heating unit and the gray early light coming through curtains that didn't quite meet in the middle, and lay still for exactly 4 minutes before she reached for her phone. There were 41 notifications. She ignored all of them except one. A text from Claudette sent at 11:50 the previous night that read, "I have your shoes in your grandmother's earring case. I'm keeping them until you tell me where to send them. Also, I'm not mad at you. I'm furious on your behalf, which is different. Call me when you're ready." Serena read this twice and felt something loosen slightly in her chest. She typed back, "Thank you. I'll call tomorrow," then corrected it to "I'll call today," then sent it. She got up, showered, put on the clothes from the one bag she'd packed. She had been practical, even in the packing. 3 changes of clothes, her laptop, the folder of documents Harriet had told her to keep in her physical possession. She made coffee from the machine on the laminate desk and stood at the window drinking it, while the city woke up below her, indifferent and continuous. And she thought, okay, one thing at a time. She did not think about Damien, not directly. He existed at the edges of her thoughts, the way a recently removed splinter exists in the memory of your thumb. You know exactly where it was. You can still feel the outline of the absence, but the thing itself is gone, and you are not going back for it. She thought about the Marchetti space on Delancey. She had walked past it 6 months ago, during a meeting that had run long, and led her out into the evening with 20 minutes to kill. It had been empty then for lease, a corner spot with good windows and the kind of bones that rewarded attention. She had stood outside it for probably longer than was rational, and taken 3 photos on her phone, and then put her phone away and gone back to her life, which at the time had still looked like a life she was choosing. She opened her phone and looked at the photos now. The windows were still good in the photos. She sent them to Harriet with the message, "Can you find out the lease terms on this property? Don't use my name yet." Harriet responded in 6 minutes, which was fast for 6:30 in the morning, and which told Serena that her attorney had been awake and alert, in a way that suggested she had anticipated being needed. Already pulled the listing last night. Harriet wrote, "We should talk this morning. There are some things you need to know before you make any property decisions." Serena read this and felt the specific quality of unease that comes from an attorney choosing the words "things you need to know" rather than just telling you the things. "What things?" she typed. "Call me at 8, Harriet wrote. "Not before. I want to make sure I have everything in front of me." Serena set the phone down. She finished the coffee. She looked at the photos of the Marchetti space. She waited. Harriet Bloom's office had the organized austerity of a woman who had learned early that clutter was a liability in any environment where clarity mattered. She had 2 windows that faced north and a single framed print on the wall behind her desk. Not art exactly, just geometry. Repeating angles in muted colors that managed to be both calming and subtly aggressive, which Serena had always thought was exactly right for an attorney's office. They met in person. Serena had taken a cab. Harriet was already at her desk when Serena arrived at 8:03. 2 coffees on the desk, a legal pad open, and the expression of a woman who had spent the night working and was choosing not to comment on it. "Sit," Harriet said. Serena sat. First, the immediate items. Harriet turned the legal pad to face her. We sent the formal withdrawal notice on the Kessler Hotel partnership last night. That's the easiest one. Your name's on the design credit. The licensing is clean. They'll negotiate. Expect them to come back with a buyout offer by end of week. The Promenade project is more complicated because Damien's equity and your creative contribution are documented together in the original partnership agreement, and his attorneys are going to argue that the contribution can't be separated from the equity stake. Can it with the right judge? Yes. It'll take time. How much time? 6 to 18 months if they fight it. Serena absorbed this. They'll fight it. His attorneys are already preparing something. I got a call at 7 this morning. What kind of something? Harriet picked up her coffee, set it down, which was the attorney's equivalent of a deep breath before difficult information. They're preparing a counterfiling, she said. It argues that your contribution to the Promenade project and 2 of the other properties was made as a function of your personal relationship with Damen Viscari, and not as an independent professional engagement, and that therefore any intellectual property or creative credit generated during that period is jointly held and cannot be unilaterally withdrawn. The room was very quiet for a moment. They're saying I worked for free, Serena said. They're saying you worked as a partner, which in the absence of a formal contract means I know what it means, Harriet. Her voice was level flat. The kind of flat that comes from pressing down hard on something that wants to rise. There's no contract. There's no contract because he said a contract would make it feel transactional. She heard herself say this, heard the specific quality of the sentence, the way it had sounded reasonable 4 years ago inside a relationship that felt permanent, and heard how it sounded now in an attorney's office with a legal pad between them. He said it would be like billing family. Harriet looked at her with an expression that was professional sympathy and nothing more, which was what Serena needed from her. Okay, Serena said. She breathed through her nose once. What else? The trademark application, the Veil signature collection. It was filed under a joint business entity rather than your name individually. I don't know when this happened. The filing date is 14 months ago, and it may have been an administrative error, or it may have been intentional. I can't tell you which until I see the original correspondence between your filing agent and Damien's legal team. Serena went very still. My filing agent, she said slowly, was Thomas Reeve. Harriet was quiet. Thomas Reeve has been Damien's attorney for 11 years, Serena said. Yes. I hired him because Damen recommended him. The room was extremely quiet now. Harriet. Serena, did he set this up? Harriet chose her next words with the precision of someone who understands that what they say in the next 30 seconds is going to exist in another person's memory forever. I can't tell you with certainty whether this was intentional without seeing the full filing history. What I can tell you is that the effect of the current filing structure is that your trademark, the one bearing your family name, your original designs, 14 months of your work, is legally attached to a business entity that Damen Viscari controls 51% of. Serena put both hands flat on the desk. Not a dramatic gesture, not a collapse. Just the action of a person who suddenly needs to feel something solid and real beneath them because the ground has done something unexpected. She looked at her hands on the desk. Her hands, which had sketched and measured and stayed up until 2 in the morning, refining things until they were right. Her hands which had produced the work that was now apparently not fully hers. How long have you known about this? She said. I discovered the structure of the filing 3 weeks ago when I was doing preliminary research. I flagged it internally as something to investigate further. I didn't have confirmation until last night. 3 weeks ago, yes. And you didn't tell me. Harriet met her eyes. You were 3 weeks from your wedding. I didn't have enough information to know whether what I was looking at was an error or a pattern. I needed more time, and I made a judgment call that I was 3 weeks from signing a marriage certificate, Serena said. Her voice had gone somewhere very quiet. The specific quiet that is not calm at all, but rather the absence of any remaining space for performance. That signature would have made all of this a marital asset question rather than a business dispute. Harriet said nothing. If I had married him yesterday, Serena said slowly, testing the shape of this sentence as it came out. Every filing, every property, every piece of work with my name on it would have been marital property. That is the correct legal read, yes. And divorcing him to recover it would have been considerably more complicated and subject to jurisdiction-specific rules on professional creative work within a marriage which our Harriet stopped. Complicated. Serena took her hands off the desk. She folded them in her lap. She looked at the geometric print on the wall behind Harriet's head and thought about a filing date 14 months ago, and a conversation in which Damien had told her that contracts made things feel transactional, and a man she had trusted handing her the phone number of his own attorney and calling it a recommendation. She thought about the moment at the altar, the one that hadn't happened because she had left before it could, and about the ring box on the vanity, and the 7 words on the note, and the version of herself that had walked out of that hotel with one bag and a plan. The plan had been good. The plan was currently in approximately 5 pieces. "What do I have?" she said. "Right now, what is unambiguously mine?" Harriet turned to a second page on her legal pad. "Your private accounts which are held solely in your name, those are yours fully. No question. The design sketches in physical form, in your possession, yours as original works. Your professional reputation, which cannot be owned by anyone else, regardless of how any filing is structured." She paused, and the Marchetti space. "If we move quickly and file the lease under your name individually, not attached to any current business entity, that property becomes yours cleanly. How quickly?" This week, before his attorneys have time to build the argument that any new venture is an extension of the existing disputed partnership. Serena nodded slowly. "There's one more thing," Harriet said. Serena looked at her, the video. Harriet turned her legal pad back to the first page. "It has 7 million views as of this morning. Several media outlets have made formal inquiries about your whereabouts in your statement. I've declined on your behalf, but there's an offer on the table from a magazine. I'll give you the details when you're ready for an exclusive interview. Significant figure, and there are 2 production companies that reached out before 9 o'clock this morning about a documentary." Serena stared at her. "I mention this," Harriet said carefully, "not because I'm recommending any of it. I mention it because you asked me what you have unambiguously. And the honest answer is that right now, Serena, the single most valuable asset you possess is the story of what happened to you yesterday, and you control it completely because it happened to you." The heating system in the office made a sound like the building settling. Serena sat with this for a long moment. Then she said, "Pull the lease for Delancey. File it this week. My name's Solo, done, on the trademark. I want every piece of original documentation you can find. Sketches, time-stamped emails, anything I sent from my own devices on my own accounts. I want to build a record that exists entirely outside of what Reeve filed. Already started. And the magazine." Serena paused. "Tell them not yet. Don't close the door. Just not yet." Harriet nodded and made a note. "What about Damien's counterfiling?" Serena said. "We respond with what?" "With the truth documented to the degree that we can document it, filed in a court that will spend the next several months determining the difference between a loving partner who contributed her professional skills freely and a professional whose skills were incorporated into a business structure without her explicit legal consent. Which one will they believe?" Harriet looked at her directly. "Right now, with 7 million people having watched a man stop his bride from getting into her own wedding car, I think a jury would be receptive to a great many things." Serena said nothing. She thought about Damien's face in that hallway, the patient expression, the smile. "It's just a car, baby. It was never about the car." She understood this now with a clarity that arrived not as a revelation, but as a confirmation. The way things feel when you've known something a long time and the evidence has simply finally arranged itself into a shape you can look at directly without flinching. The car had not been the problem. The car had been the symptom. The problem was a man who had over 4 years, and with no apparent malice, and therefore no available excuse, built a structure in which she was essential but not central, valuable but not protected, present in every room but documented in none of them. Not a villain, something more ordinary, and therefore more devastating, a man who had simply never made her real on paper. She left Harriet's office at 9:45. She stood on the sidewalk outside the building, and the city moved around her the way it always did. Taxis, pedestrians, a food cart steaming at the corner, two women arguing cheerfully about something in a language she didn't speak. The ordinary friction of 10 million lives occupying the same space. Her phone lit up. A call from a number she didn't recognize, which she declined. Then another number she didn't recognize, which she also declined. Then a number she did recognize. Damen's mother, Eleonora. And she stood on the sidewalk holding the phone while it rang, looking at the name on the screen. And for a moment, she felt the old pull of it, the familiar gravity of a relationship that had organized 4 years of her life. The instinct to answer, because answering was what you did when family called. She let it ring. She put the phone in her bag. She started walking. The Marchetti space on Delancey looked different on a Tuesday morning in October than it had looked 6 months ago in the evening. The morning light came through those good windows at an angle that turned the empty interior amber, illuminating the dust on the floor in a way that was not charming so much as it was honest. This is what the place actually is, the light said. This is what you're starting with. Not beauty, not potential in the soft focus sense. Just square footage and bones and the specific silence of a space waiting to be told what it is. Serena stood outside it with her hands in her coat pockets. The real estate contact Harriet had reached was waiting inside. Serena could see him through the window, a young man in a good coat who was checking his phone with the practiced patience of someone accustomed to clients who were late or conflicted, or both. She looked at the space. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen, the smell of anise and burnt sugar, her place. She thought about the list she had written in the back of the rideshare. Every item on it true. Every item the record of a woman who had been teaching a man by example that her patience had no floor. She thought about the trademark filing dated 14 months ago, and Thomas Reeves' phone number, written in Damien's handwriting, on a piece of paper she had kept in her desk for 3 years, because she trusted the source and the marriage certificate she had not signed. She had not signed it. She pulled the door open. The young man in the good coat looked up and started to smile the professional smile of someone beginning a transaction. But she was already walking past him, moving through the space the way you move through something you are measuring, not with instruments, but with your body. This is where the counter goes. This is where the light is best in the afternoon. This is the corner where you put the thing that makes people stop when they pass on the street and look in. She stopped in the center of the room. The floor under her feet was old hardwood, scuffed and honest and solid. She could smell the emptiness of the place, that specific odor of a room between lives. She crouched down and pressed one hand flat to the floor. The wood was cool and slightly rough under her palm. She thought, okay. She thought your name, only your name. She stood up. She turned to the young man who had followed at a respectful distance and was watching her with the uncertain expression of someone who is not sure what they have just witnessed, but suspects it was important. I'll take it, she said. We haven't discussed the terms yet, he said. I know we'll discuss them, but I want you to know before we sit down that I'm not negotiating location or space. I know what I want, and it's this. So the conversation we're about to have is about price and timeline, not about weather. He blinked, nodded, reached for his folder. There is one thing, she said. Of course. The name on the lease, it's going to be Vale. Just Vale. No additional names. No business entity. Nothing else attached to it. She held his gaze. Can you make sure that's reflected in every document from the beginning? Absolutely, Miss Vale. Good. She sat down at the one folding table in the space. The realtor had set it up in the center of the room, 2 chairs, the professional setup of a temporary negotiation in a permanent place. And she pulled her notepad from her bag, the one with 6 pages of plan and 3 pages of list, and she opened it to a fresh page. She wrote the address at the top. Below it, she wrote Day 1. Outside the window, a bus went past, then a woman with a stroller moving fast, then 2 teenagers on their phones walking slowly, then a delivery truck that briefly blocked the light entirely before moving on. The light came back. Serena picked up her pen. She began to write the numbers that would tell her whether this was possible, and found, as the columns filled in, and the margins tightened, and the shape of it became visible. That possible was not the word she was looking for. The word she was looking for was inevitable. The feeling of a thing that should have happened a long time ago, finally arriving at its correct moment, slightly behind schedule, carrying everything it needed. She pressed the pen hard enough to leave an impression on the page beneath her name. Only her name. And 3 blocks away, in a black car parked outside Harriet Bloom's building, a man named Roar, who worked for Damen Viscari, sat watching the entrance with the patient stillness of someone who has been told to wait and watch and report, and who has not been told what to do with what he finds. Because the man who sent him is sitting in a hotel suite with a face like a closed door, and a phone that has stopped ringing because the world has temporarily run out of ways to tell him what he already knows. That he is looking in the wrong direction, that she is not hiding, that she is 3 blocks away in a room with good windows and a floor of honest hardwood, writing her name at the top of a page, and she is not waiting for anyone. Roar filed his report at 10:23 in the morning, sitting in the black car with the engine off, typing with 2 thumbs on a phone that auto-corrected Delancey to Delancey twice before he gave up and spelled it wrong on purpose. He described what he'd seen. Serena Vale entering a commercial property on Delancey Street at 9:51, accompanied by a real estate agent, remaining inside for 42 minutes, exiting at 10:33 with a folder under her arm and the specific body language. He didn't use those words. He wrote, she looked like she knew what she was doing. Of a woman who had finished one thing and was moving directly to the next. He sent the report. He waited. Damien's response came back in 4 minutes. Don't follow her. Come back. Roar looked at the message for a moment, then started the car. Damen was in the suite when Marco arrived at 11 o'clock. Not the wedding suite. He had moved to a standard room on the 9th floor sometime in the early morning, taking his jacket and his phone and leaving everything else where it was. The standard room was smaller, anonymous, the kind of room that doesn't ask anything of you. And he had sat in it through most of the night with the television on mute and the city outside doing its indifferent thing, and his phone on the table accumulating messages he sorted into 2 categories. Ones that required a response because they represented actual operational consequences, and ones that were noise. The noise category was winning by a significant margin. He had slept for possibly 3 hours in the chair by the window, which was not sleep so much as a negotiated pause between one state of alertness and another, and he had woken with a stiffness in his neck, and the immediate, unambiguous awareness of everything that had happened the previous day. Arriving before he was ready for it, the way bad news always does, not gradually, but all at once, like walking into a room where the lights are already on. Marco brought coffee and a leather folio and sat across from him at the small round table by the window, with the expression of a man who has been awake as long as Damien has and is choosing to say nothing about it. Business first, Damen said. Greco rescheduled for next week. He said it diplomatically, but it's concern over the video. I know. Antonelli's office called again this morning. More specifically, they called my cell rather than the main line, which is a signal. Yes. Damien wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. His knuckles were not quite white, but the grip was tighter than coffee required. Who else? Rivera. He wants to meet. Rivera never wants to meet. He wants to send someone to meet. This time he wants to meet in person, which is Rivera telling me something without saying it. Marco opened the folio. He laid out 3 printed pages, which was unusual. Marco rarely printed anything, and the act of printing suggested information he wanted Damien to hold in his hands, rather than read on a screen, which meant it was the kind of information that should not move through servers or histories. The trademark filing, Marco said. Damen looked at the pages without touching them. Reeve sent me a summary at 7 this morning, unsolicited. Marco's voice was careful and neutral. He wanted me to have it before, he said, before things moved further than necessary, before her attorney got far enough to make it a problem in court. That's the inference, yes. He's covering himself. He's covering himself, Marco confirmed. Damen picked up the top page. He read it the way he read things he already partially understood and was looking for the specific detail that changes the shape of everything. quickly scanning and then stopping suddenly at a sentence and reading it again with his full attention. He set the page down. 14 months ago, he said. Yes. I was in Milan 14 months ago with her. Marco said nothing. We were there for the textile sourcing for the Promenade project. She spent 3 days in meetings with suppliers and spent the evening sketching. She showed me some of the sketches. He paused. She was proud of them. It was the first time in a long time I'd seen her. It was a good trip. Damien. Who filed it? Reeves' office. Whose instruction? Marco was quiet for a moment. That ran slightly too long. The filing was generated by Reeves' office under instruction from the partnership entity. The authorization signature on the filing documentation is yours. Damien looked up. You signed a large bundle of partnership documents in September of that year, 14 months ago. It was the quarterly administrative bundle. Reeves presented it as routine. The trademark incorporation was on page 31. The room was very quiet. Damen looked at Marco with an expression that was not anger yet. It was the stage before anger. The stage that looks like stillness, but is actually a very fast internal calculation. Running backward through events, finding the page, seeing the signature, understanding the geometry of how a man you trusted built something into a document you didn't read closely enough because you trusted him to present it correctly. He put it in the quarterly bundle, Damen said on page 31. Did you know? No. Marco said it flatly and directly. The way he said things he needed Damien to believe without question. I did not know. If I had known, I would have told you. Damien looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once, which meant he believed him, and the question was closed. Where is Reeves now? His office. He's been there since 8. He knows you know. That's why he sent the summary. He's already in the position of managing this, not explaining it. He has his own counsel on standby. Of course he does. Damien stood up. The movement was not abrupt. He unfolded from the chair the way you stand when you have been sitting in one position too long and your body objects. And he crossed to the window and stood with his hands in his pockets looking at the city. And the posture was familiar to Marco for many years and many rooms. It was the posture of a man who was building something in his head, arranging pieces, testing the architecture for load-bearing points. What she built, Damen said, not turning around. The hospitality work, the designs, how much of it? He stopped, started again. If the last 4 years had been different, if I had given her contracts, her own agreements not folded into mine, what would she have? Marco considered this with the seriousness it deserved. The Promenade design credit alone is worth significant licensing revenue. The hotel aesthetic she developed for Kessler is being replicated in their new properties. She should be receiving royalties for that. The Veil signature collection, if it had been filed correctly, would be hers outright, and the name alone right now with the public attention. He paused. She would be in a very strong position. Damien turned around. Instead, she has an attorney fighting for what should already be hers, he said. Yes, because I let Reeves handle everything. Because Reeves handled everything, which I allowed. Marco didn't answer. Call Reeves, Damien said. Tell him I'm coming to his office, not to meet. Tell him I'm coming to his office. And he should have every document related to Serena's filings on his desk before I get there. And he should have his own attorney present if that makes him feel safer. But he should be there. And if he's not, then we'll have a longer conversation about what it means to not be there. Marco closed the folio, stood, straightened his jacket. There was a quality of relief in his efficiency that told Damen what he needed to know. That Marco had been waiting for this, for the moment when Damien stopped sitting in a chair by a window and started moving. Because Marco's entire professional function was motion, and the last 18 hours had been an unusual suspension of it. One more thing, Marco said at the door. What? Bianca called the suite 3 times last night. I intercepted. She wants to talk to you. Damen looked at him. She says it's not about what you think it is. It never is. He walked past Marco into the corridor. Reeves' office was in a building on 53rd that had the self-satisfied architecture of a place that had been expensive for a long time and expected to continue being expensive. The lobby had marble floors and a security desk and elevator bank that required a key card above the 4th floor. all of which Damien moved through with the ease of a man for whom systems designed to control access have always been to accommodate his presence. Because he had spent 20 years ensuring that his presence carried the kind of gravity that made systems accommodating. The receptionist on Reeves' floor, a young man who had clearly been briefed, stood when the elevator opened. "Mr. Viscari, Mr. Reeve is expecting." "I know he is." He didn't slow down. The conference room was at the end of the corridor, glass-walled, and through it Damen could see Thomas Reeves standing near the window with a man he didn't know who had the professional posture of legal counsel. On the conference table there were several stacked folders and a laptop open to something. Reeve was 61 years old, silver-haired, and had the cultivated composure of a man who had spent decades in rooms where composure was currency. He turned when Damien opened the door, and his expression had been arranged in advance into something that was not quite apologetic and not quite defensive. The practiced middle ground of someone who has decided that the best available position is cooperative. "Damien," he said. "Sit down, Thomas." "I'd like to sit down." Reeves sat. His counsel sat beside him. Damien remained standing, which was a choice, and everyone in the room understood it as such. "Page 31, Damen said. Reeves' jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The quarterly bundle was prepared by my office based on the structure of the partnership entity and the standard protocols we had established. Page 31, Thomas. I want to hear you explain page 31. The trademark incorporation was filed to protect the intellectual property generated within the partnership structure. At the time, the determination was made that incorporating it within the joint entity provided better protection than a standalone filing. Better protection for whom?" Reeves stopped. "Better protection for whom?" Damen said again very quietly, which was considerably more alarming than if he had said it loudly. "The partnership entity." She had no seat in the partnership entity. She had no equity. She had no defined role in the documented structure of that entity. Damen put both hands on the table and leaned forward slightly. "You incorporated her creative work into a structure she had no ownership of, and buried the paperwork on page 31 of a document I signed without reading that specific page because I trusted you to present documents that represented what you said they represented. The document was available for review." "Don't." The word landed like a door closing. "Don't finish that sentence. You have been my attorney for 11 years, and you know the difference between a document that was available for review and a document that was designed to be signed without review. You know which one that was." Reeves' counsel opened his mouth. Damen looked at him. The counsel closed his mouth. "What I need from you," Damien said, straightening up, "is every document related to Serena Vale's filings. Everything. Every draft, every correspondence, every version of every page. You'll provide it to my office today." "Damien, there are privilege considerations. She was not your client. There is no privilege. She is the subject of filings made by your office on behalf of an entity I controlled, and those filings need to be reviewed in their entirety and corrected where they are incorrect." "Corrected," Reeves said carefully. "The Vale signature trademark is going to be refiled in her name individually separate from every entity I have any connection to." He held Reeves' gaze. "You will facilitate this. You will not bill for it, and you will document in writing that the original structure was an administrative error made by your office without the explicit knowledge or consent of Miss Vale, which is accurate and which you will sign. That statement would expose Thomas." Damen pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. He sat the way he sat when he had finished moving and arrived at the position he intended to hold. "You have two choices in this room today. You can facilitate what I'm describing, which costs you some professional embarrassment and a malpractice exposure you can manage, or you can refuse, in which case the documentation of what happened on page 31 of that quarterly bundle becomes available to people who are not in this room and whose interest in it will be considerably less contained than mine." He paused. "I want to be very clear that when I say documentation, I'm referring to Marco's records, my own records, and a thorough review of every quarterly bundle you have prepared for me in 11 years, any page of which may contain decisions you made without adequate disclosure. Do you understand what I'm offering you? Reeve was very still. His counsel leaned toward him and murmured something. Reeve waved him off with a slight movement of 2 fingers. The statement, Reeve said finally, will be prepared as an internal correction notice, not a public. However, you need to structure it legally. I'm not interested in the format. I'm interested in the outcome and the refiling this week. That timeline is this week, Thomas. Another silence. All right, Reeve said. He said it without inflection, without visible emotion, with the contained acceptance of a man who has run his calculation and found only one viable exit. He reached for the top folder on the stack in front of him. Damen stood. Marco will coordinate. He'll be in contact within the hour. He walked to the door. Damien. Reeve's voice stopped him. He turned. Reeve had aged somehow in the last 10 minutes. Or perhaps Damen was seeing him accurately for the first time. The actual age underneath the cultivated composure, the years of careful maneuvering that left a particular kind of mark on a face. For what it's worth, Reeve said, the original intent was to protect the asset base of the partnership. Not do I know what you tell yourself, Thomas, Damen said. I've been telling myself things for 4 years. I'm acquainted with the process. He left. The elevator took 40 seconds going down, same as it had going up. And Damien stood in it with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the middle distance, and felt the specific quality of a confrontation that has gone the way you needed it to go and left you emptier rather than more full. He had expected something from Reeve's office, clarity perhaps, or the release that comes from addressing something directly, and found instead just the next step in a sequence that had more steps, and the knowledge that every step was correcting something that should not have required correction. Marco was waiting in the lobby. Done, Damen said. He'll cooperate. He'll cooperate. They walked out into the street. The October air was cold and direct, the kind of cold that arrives without apology, and it hit Damien's face as they came through the glass doors with a physicality he was faintly grateful for, something immediate, something present, a sensation that existed entirely in the current moment rather than in the accumulated wreckage of the previous 48 hours. Her attorney, he said. Harriet Bloom, I know who she is. I want you to contact her office. He stopped walking, turned to Marco. Not to negotiate, not to make an offer. I want you to call Harriet Bloom's office and tell them that Thomas Reeve will be providing documentation of an administrative error in the Vale signature trademark filing, and that the refiling under Serena Vale's individual name is being processed this week, and that this comes without conditions, without a counteroffer, and without any request for communication from Miss Vale. Marco looked at him. I'm not trading it, Damien said, but it's hers. It was always hers. I'm returning it because that's the only correct thing to do. And because he stopped, ran one hand across the back of his neck, because the alternative is being a man who holds a woman's own name hostage, and I already know what that man looks like. I watched him on a phone screen in a hotel bar 2 nights ago. I don't want to be him anymore. Marco was quiet for a moment, and the property work, the Kessler royalties, the promenade credit, all of it. Harriet's office, no conditions. Damien, your legal team is going to, I know what they're going to say. Tell them I've decided. The board. Marco, right. Make the call. Marco stepped away to make the call. Damien stood on the sidewalk outside Thomas Reeve's building on 53rd Street and watched the traffic and felt the cold and thought about nothing specific, which was unusual for him, and which felt under the circumstances like the only honest available response to a situation that had revealed itself to be larger and older and more serious than he had been willing to look at directly while he was inside it. He thought about her face in the ride-share footage that 1,000 comment sections had analyzed frame by frame. The way she had gone somewhere inside herself. He thought about her folding the wedding dress. He had not been able to stop thinking about this, not the leaving. He understood the leaving. He could map it. It was a response to a series of identifiable provocations, and he could trace it, but the folding. She had taken the time to fold the dress carefully and lay it across the chair. She had not crumpled it or left it on the floor or hung it in the closet as if she planned to come back for it. She had folded it with the specific attention of someone who understands that the object itself is not the problem, that the object is only a thing, that things deserve to be handled gently, even when you are done with them. That detail told him something about her, that 4 years of proximity had apparently not quite managed to land. She was not operating from anger. She had never been operating from anger. She had been operating from something considerably more durable and considerably more final. And he had spent 4 years mistaking its exterior texture for forgiveness, when what it actually was clarity. She saw things clearly. She always had. He had mistaken her clarity for patience because he had needed her to be patient. And she had allowed the mistake because she was a woman who gave things, relationships, people, situations, every fair chance before she closed the book on them. She had given him every fair chance. He had used all of them. Marco came back. Harriet Bloom's office says they'll have a response by end of day. The paralegal sounded. He paused, surprised. Good. Rivera still wants to meet. Schedule it. And Bianca tonight at 7. The restaurant on Mercer. The one in the back. He started walking. Not because I want to, because there are things I need to say to her that need to be said in person. And once they're said, I want to be done. What things? Damien didn't answer immediately. They moved through the foot traffic of 53rd. 2 men in good coats walking with the purposeful unhurry of people who have somewhere to be and are not panicking about getting there. Things she already knows, he said finally. I just need her to hear me say them without the 20-year friendship, making it easier for either of us to pretend I'm not saying them. Marco nodded. And the video. Damen said it's at 11 million. He didn't respond to this. 3 news programs want statements. A radio show in Boston. Someone who knew you when you were starting out. He's been talking about it on air sympathetically toward her, which is accurate. Marco stopped walking. Damen took 2 more steps before he realized and stopped 2 turning. You're going to give her everything back, Marco said. The trademark, the royalties, the promenade credit, all of it. No conditions. Yes. And you're not asking for anything in return. No. Not even a conversation. Damien looked at him. Marco had the expression of a man who has known someone for 17 years and is looking at them now the way you look at something you are seeing differently than you have seen it before. Not worse, not better, just differently. She doesn't owe me a conversation, Damen said. She doesn't owe me anything. That's the whole point. They stood on the sidewalk with the city moving around them. The Viscari board meets Thursday. Marco said, I know. After the video, after the wedding, they're going to want to discuss leadership continuity. Whether I know, Damen, are you ready for Thursday? Damien looked at the street. A cab went past, then a cyclist, then a woman with an enormous tote bag who was walking and reading simultaneously with the practiced balance of a seasoned New Yorker. No, he said honestly, but I'll be there. He started walking again. The restaurant on Mercer was the kind of place that understood that the most valuable thing it could offer certain clientele was privacy, and it delivered this through geography. The room in the back required passing through the main dining room, and then through a secondary corridor, and then through a door that looked like a supply closet, but opened into a space of 12 tables, low lighting, and a maitre d' who had been making eye contact with important people for 30 years, and understood without being told when a table was not to be approached unnecessarily. Bianca was already there when Damien arrived at 7:03. She was wearing something dark and uncharacteristically understated. She had always used clothing as a form of communication. And tonight the message was, I know this is serious. She was drinking water, not wine, which was another message. I am not here to manage this socially. I came prepared to hear something I may not want to hear. Damien sat down. They looked at each other across the table, with the specific quality of 2 people who have known each other so long that the presence of discomfort between them is itself the most disorienting thing in the room, because discomfort had never been a feature of their dynamic. Their dynamic had been ease, instinctive, and mutual, the ease of people who had built a private language over decades and used it constantly and without thought. Tonight, the private language was unavailable. Thank you for coming, he said. Of course. I'm not going to be here long, he said. I have things to say, and I want to say them clearly. And then I think we both need some time. She nodded. Her hands were on the table, not fidgeting, which told him she was working hard to hold a stillness that did not come naturally to her. What happened at the wedding was my fault, he said. Every piece of it. I made choices, and I kept making them. And I told myself every single time that you needed something from me, and that Serena was strong enough to absorb the cost. That was not fair to her, and it was not honest, and I allowed it because it was easier than confronting what it actually meant. Bianca didn't say anything. Her jaw was set. But I also need you to tell me something, he said. And I need you to tell me truthfully, because what I do with the answer matters, and I am done making decisions based on information I haven't fully examined. What do you want to know? The bridal car. He held her gaze. Whose idea was it originally? Not the way it was presented to me in the moment. Whose idea? Bianca was quiet for a count of 4. Mine, she said. Why? Another pause shorter. Because Luciano was going to see the footage, she said. Her voice was even, but her jaw was tight, and her eyes had taken on the particular quality of someone telling the truth after a long time of not quite telling it. He's in Rome. We've been. It's complicated. He thinks I'm irrelevant to anyone important. I wanted him to see footage of me arriving at a Viscari wedding in the bridal car with you. She stopped, started again. I wanted him to think I mattered. The table was very quiet. Luciano, Damien said. Yes, you used my wedding, you used Serena's wedding to make another man jealous. Bianca said nothing. And I handed you the keys, Damen said. His voice was not raised. It was, if anything, quieter than usual, which was the quality that people who knew him understood as the signal that something had arrived at a final resting place. Damien, I didn't think. No, he said. You didn't think about her at all. That's what I'm saying to you. Neither of us did. We have spent 20 years not thinking about the people around us when we were thinking about each other. And we've called it friendship, and we've called it family, and we've called it a lot of things. And the woman who actually deserved our consideration paid the full price of all of it. Bianca's eyes were wet. She was not someone who cried easily, and the effort of containing it was visible in the set of her mouth and the tension across her forehead. And Damien looked at it with the compassion that was genuine and that sat beside something harder and did not dissolve it. I love you, he said. That's not the question. The question is what kind of love it has been and what it has cost and who has been paying. He put his napkin on the table. I think we need to not see each other for a while, he said, not as a punishment. I'm not punishing you. I'm telling you that I need space to understand who I am without this dynamic. And I think you need the same thing. And I think we have been so comfortable with each other for so long that we have been using that comfort to avoid exactly this kind of understanding. She looked at him for a moment. She was the 8-year-old girl 3 houses down, the one who had knocked on his door every morning for a whole summer because her house was loud in the mornings and his house was quiet, and he had let her in because nobody had told him yet that there were reasons not to. Okay, she said. It was the sound of something ending, not badly, but completely. He stood, put on his jacket. I hope Luciano knows what he has in you, he said. I mean that you deserve someone who sees you without you needing to prove anything. She looked up at him with something in her face that was not the performance of an emotion, but the actual thing. So did she, Bianca said. He held her gaze for a moment. Yeah, he said, she did. He walked out through the private corridor and through the main dining room and out through the front door of the restaurant on Mercer. And the October night hit him again. The same direct cold, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment with his hands in his coat pockets and breathed it in. And then his phone lit up in his pocket, and he pulled it out and read the screen. Marco, Harriet Bloom's office called. They received the documentation from Reeve. She wants to confirm. No conditions, no requests, no contact. Damien typed confirmed. No conditions, no contact. He sent it. He put the phone away. He stood on Mercer Street with the city around him, and the cold and the sound of a night that was continuing regardless. And he understood with the specific quality of understanding that arrives when you have stopped trying to manage the shape of something and simply looked at it. He understood that Thursday's board meeting was going to ask him questions he didn't know the answers to yet, and that the answers to those questions were going to cost him things he had previously considered non-negotiable, and that he was going to have to decide whether the man he was becoming required the empire the man he had been, had built. He thought about a woman pressing her palm flat to a hardwood floor in an empty room on Delancey Street. He thought about day one, written at the top of a page. He thought about what it would take to become something from nothing, when everything you had built was attached to someone else's name. And somewhere in the back of his chest, underneath the grief and the accountability and the exhaustion that had settled into his bones over 48 hours of not quite sleeping, something else was present, something he had no clean word for and was not ready to examine directly. He started walking. Thursday was coming, and the board would be there, and Rivera would be there, and the full accumulated weight of 20 years of the Viscari name would be there, and he would stand in front of all of it and give them the answer to their question, and the answer was going to be the most expensive thing he had ever said out loud, and he was not ready, and he was going to do it. Thursday arrived the way difficult things tend to arrive. Not dramatically, not with any weather that matched the occasion, just an ordinary gray morning with coffee going cold on a desk and a clock moving at its usual speed regardless of what the day required. Damen was dressed by 6:15. He had slept in the hotel room on the 9th floor for a third consecutive night. Not because he had nowhere else to go, but because going back to the penthouse he shared with no one now felt like a gesture he wasn't ready to make. The penthouse was full of the architectural evidence of a life he had been building in one direction, and he needed several more days before he could stand in those rooms without the specific grief of someone walking through a construction site for a building that was never going to be finished. He stood at the window with the cold coffee and looked at the city and thought about what he was going to say in 4 hours. He had been thinking about it since Mercer Street. He had thought about it through 2 nights of fractured sleep and 1 long phone call with a man named Carver, who had been his mentor 20 years ago and who now lived in Vermont and raised retrievers, and answered the phone at 11 at night without complaint when Damien called, which he hadn't done in 6 years. Carver had listened to the full account without interrupting, which had taken 40 minutes, and then had been quiet for a moment and said, "What do you want the rest of your life to look like?" Damen had said, "I don't know yet." Carver had said, "That's the most honest thing you've said in 40 minutes. Start there." He had hung up and looked at the ceiling and started there. What he found when he looked at it without the scaffolding of the organization and the reputation and the accumulated weight of the Viscari name was smaller and quieter than he expected. He wanted to build things that didn't require anyone to be afraid of him. He wanted to sit across a table from someone and have the conversation be about the actual subject rather than about the subtext of what he represented. He wanted at some point to sleep the way Carver apparently slept, without infrastructure, without the particular vigilance that had been so constant for so long, that he had stopped experiencing it as vigilance and had started experiencing it as just the normal texture of being awake. He wanted a morning where the toast burned, and it was funny. He did not think about Serena when he thought this. He told himself he did not think about Serena when he thought this. The coffee was fully cold. He set it down. The Viscari board met in a building on Park Avenue, in a room that had been designed consciously or not to communicate the relationship between the organization and permanence. Dark wood, heavy table, chairs that did not move quietly, portraits on the wall that were not of anyone's actual family, but created the impression of lineage, of continuity, of a thing that had existed long before the people currently in the room and intended to continue long after. There were 9 people at the table when Damien walked in at 10 o'clock. He knew all of them. He had known most of them for more than a decade. He had sat at this table in conditions ranging from routine to genuinely dangerous, and had always entered the room the same way, settled, contained, projecting the specific quality of authority that is not performed, but rather exists as a fact about a person that a room recognizes before any word is spoken. He entered the room the same way today. What was different was that he was not going to be leaving it the same way he arrived. Rivera was at the far end of the table. He was 73 years old and had the compact stillness of a man who had outlasted several things that should have finished him, and he watched Damien cross the room with the specific attention of someone who has already formed their position and is waiting to see whether the other person is going to make this easy or difficult. Damien sat at the head of the table. He put both hands flat on the surface. He looked around the room at 9 faces, some of them worried, some of them waiting, 2 of them wearing the careful neutrality of men who had already had a conversation before this one and were managing the distance between their private position and their public one. "I'm going to say this without preamble," Damien said, "because this table has always worked best when the actual subject is on it and not under it." Nobody moved. The events of Sunday have created a situation that affects this organization's relationships, its public standing, and its operational continuity in ways you've all been briefed on. I'm not going to relitigate the events. I'm going to tell you what I've decided. Rivera's eyes hadn't moved from his face. "I'm stepping back from active leadership of the Viscari organization," Damen said. "Not temporarily. I'm recommending Marco Santini as transitional director, with full operational authority effective at the end of this meeting. I will remain available for specific matters that require my involvement in an advisory capacity for a defined period of no longer than 18 months, at which point my role in the organization will be fully concluded." The room absorbed this. One of the men to his left, Ferretti, who had been with the organization for 22 years, and who Damien had always considered a fundamentally decent man operating in an indecent structure, put his pen down on the table with a small, deliberate click. That was the equivalent of clearing his throat. "This is your organization," Ferretti said. "It was my father's organization. I've run it for 14 years. I've made it considerably more than it was. And I've done that by understanding when a thing requires what I can give it and when it requires something else." Damien looked at him steadily. "It requires something else now. I'm not the right person to rebuild its public reputation from the position I'm currently in. Marco is. Marco has been ready for 3 years, and we've all known it." "The timing," Rivera said, speaking for the first time. His voice was low and measured and carried the weight of a man who has never in his professional life raised it and never needed to. "Is the timing about the organization or about something else?" "Both," Damen said. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Both things are true simultaneously, and I'm not going to insult you by arguing they're separate." Rivera looked at him for a long moment. "The woman," Rivera said, "is not a factor in this decision in the way you mean. She's not someone I'm chasing or someone I owe a gesture to. She's someone who showed me something about myself that required action." Damen held Rivera's gaze without difficulty, because what he was saying was true, and he had found in the last 72 hours that the truth had a particular quality of ease that he had not previously associated with it. "The action is this. You're giving up your seat at this table for a lesson in self-reflection," one of the men to Rivera's right said. His name was Galt, and he had always had the instinct to reduce things to their most cynical framing, which Damien had once found useful and now found simply accurate about Galt's character. "I'm giving up my seat at this table," Damien said, "because I've been sitting in it on borrowed moral credit for longer than I should have, and the interest has come due, and I'd rather pay it now than compound it further." He looked at Galt without hostility. "You can call it self-reflection if that framing makes it easier to process. I'd call it accounting." Galt looked at his hands. The vote when it came was 7-2 in favor of the transition. The 2 who voted against were doing so from loyalty rather than opposition, which Damien understood and which he made a note to address privately. The procedural elements took 40 minutes. Documents were signed. Marco was called in at 11:15 and was told, and his response to being told was to be very still for a moment, and then to nod once, which was exactly the response of someone who had been waiting for a thing they weren't sure would come. At 11:57, Damen Viscari walked out of the boardroom at Park Avenue for the last time in his current capacity, and the city outside was doing exactly what it had been doing when he walked in. And this was in some ways the strangest part, the total indifference of the world to the internal architecture of a single man's rearrangement. He stood on the sidewalk. Marco came out 2 minutes later. They stood together without speaking for a moment. "You didn't have to do that," Marco said. I know the organization is going to be fine. I want you to know that. I know that too. That's not why I'm worried. Marco looked at him. I've been running something for 20 years, Damen said. I don't know what I am without it. Then find out, Marco said simply, without embellishment, because Marco had always understood that the most useful thing you could give someone in a moment of honest admission was not comfort, but permission. Damen put out his hand. Marco shook it. Then he did something he hadn't done in a professional context in many years. He pulled Marco into a brief, solid embrace, the kind between men who don't do it often and mean it completely when they do. Call me if you need me, Damen said. I will. Don't call me for the first 6 months. Marco almost smiled. Understood. Damien walked to the car waiting at the curb, got in, and gave the driver an address that was not the penthouse. 6 months moved the way time moves when you were not managing it, but simply living in it unevenly. With long stretches that felt both slow and dense and sudden compressions where you looked up, and 3 weeks had passed. Damen moved out of the penthouse in November. He found a smaller place in Brooklyn, a third-floor walk-up with a kitchen that faced west and got the afternoon light. And he spent several weeks in it getting accustomed to the specific quality of silence that exists in a space that belongs only to you and requires nothing from you except your presence. He cooked badly. He read things he had been meaning to read for years. He called Carver twice, not at 11 at night, but in the morning, which felt different, less urgent, more considered. The call of a man choosing to maintain a connection rather than reaching for it in crisis. He read about the lawsuit between Harriet Bloom's office and Thomas Reeve, which had been filed in December, and which was progressing in the way that legal proceedings between parties, who both have resources, progress slowly, expensively, and with the specific public visibility that Reeve had been hoping to avoid. He did not involve himself in it. He had provided his documentation and his signed statement, and he had let the process be the process. He heard through Marco in January that Serena's trademark had been refilled under her name in December without incident, that the Kessler royalty documentation had been restructured to reflect her actual contribution, and that her attorney had sent a formal acknowledgement of receipt that contained no additional communication. He had asked Marco to stop updating him after that, not because it was painful. It was, but that wasn't the reason. The reason was that he had made decisions in November that were not contingent on outcomes in Serena's life, and monitoring those outcomes was a way of making them contingent, which was a version of the old pattern, wearing different clothes. He was trying to stop wearing the old patterns. It was harder than he had expected, and more interesting than he had feared. He started working with a development group in February on a legitimate hospitality project. A small hotel concept in the Catskills, nothing to do with the Viscari name, carried under his own given name in a structure so straightforward that his new attorney, a direct and mildly impatient woman who worked from an office in Chelsea, had laughed when she reviewed it and said, "This is just a normal business. You know that, right? It's just a normal business." He had said, "Yes, that's the idea." He had meant it. Serena opened the Vale Pastry House on a Saturday in March. The Delancey space had taken 4 months of construction, 6 months of recipe development that happened simultaneously in the small apartment kitchen where she had moved in October, and 1 month of soft opening during which she served exactly 8 tables and used the revenue to pay for the espresso machine she had been unable to justify in the original budget. Claudette had organized the opening because Claudette organized things the way some people breathe, not as a choice, but as a fundamental expression of nature. She had also, at some point in January, stopped being Serena's event coordinator and become something else that didn't have a professional title, but manifested as showing up at the Delancey space on Tuesday evenings with her laptop and her opinions and an understanding of Serena's work that was more accurate than Serena's own understanding on the days when she was too close to it. The opening was not the kind of event Serena would have attended 2 years ago when attending events had meant Damien's arm and Damien's contacts and the particular social geometry of a woman present as an extension of a man's world. It was 40 people in a room that seated 40. Good music at a volume, that allowed for actual conversation, and pastries that Serena had made herself beginning at 4 in the morning, and which were by a margin that surprised even her better than what she had made in any professional kitchen where she had worked for someone else. She stood behind the counter for most of it, not performing, just working. The butter tarts were gone by 6:30. She made a note about quantity for next week. Someone asked about catering, and she wrote down their contact information on a notepad she kept behind the counter. The same brand of notepad she had been writing in since October, and the pages of this one contained a different kind of list than the first one. Not a record of what had been taken from her, but a record of what she was building. Her mother arrived at 7 o'clock, came through the door with her coat still on, and her eyes doing the thing they did when she was trying not to cry, which was looking at everything except the person she most wanted to look at. Serena came around the counter and put her arms around her, and her mother held on with the grip of a woman who had watched her daughter go through something that had no adequate maternal response except presence. The almond croissants, her mother said finally when they separated. She was inspecting the remaining pastries in the case with the critical expertise of a woman who had been baking since before Serena was born. The lamination. "I know," Serena said. "Third batch is better. You'll see next week. I'll be here next week. I know you will." Her mother reached across and tucked a strand of hair behind Serena's ear in the way she had done since Serena was small. And Serena let her and stood still in the gesture for a moment with the particular piece of someone who is exactly where they should be doing, exactly what they should be doing, with the people who have always been the correct people. The opening ended at 9 o'clock. Claudette and 2 others helped with cleanup, and by 10:15 the space was set for the next morning. And the chairs were up and the lights were low, and Serena stood in the center of the room alone for a moment. The same position she had stood in October when the floor was dusty and the real estate agent was hovering, and felt the difference between those 2 versions of the same room. She crouched down and pressed her palm flat to the floor. The wood was warmer now. It had been walked on for 4 months by people making decisions about construction, and then for 1 month of soft opening by tables of 8, and tonight by 40 people who had come to see what she had made of the space where she had pressed her palm to the floor in October and said okay, and meant it. She stayed there for a moment. Then she stood up, got her coat, turned off the remaining lights, and walked out into a March night that was cold and clear and full of the city doing what cities do, which is continue. She saw him in May, not arranged, not the result of anyone's coordination or anyone's intervention, or any of the various attempts by various well-meaning people in the preceding months to create a context in which 2 adults could have a conversation that those people felt was necessary. She had declined all of those attempts with the consistent patience of someone who is not bitter about a thing, but who is also not ready to let other people's sense of narrative resolution set the timeline. She was at a farmer's market on the west side on a Saturday morning in May, specifically in front of a table of rhubarb, which she was going to use for the seasonal tart she had been developing for 2 weeks, when she looked up and he was there. He was not looking at her yet. He was at the table adjacent, reading the label on a jar of something, honey possibly, or preserves, with the slightly squinting attention of a man who has not yet accepted that he needs reading glasses. He was wearing a jacket she didn't recognize, and he had a canvas tote bag over one shoulder, which was the kind of detail that lodged itself in her brain with a specificity she wasn't looking for. The canvas tote bag, the reading glasses situation, the jacket she didn't know. He looked like a man who had been living his own life. She went back to the rhubarb. She picked up 3 stalks and felt their weight and thought about the tart, the texture she was working toward, the ratio that wasn't quite right yet. And then she heard him say her name, not loudly, not with any particular charge or apology or weight of intention, just her name. The way you say someone's name when you've seen them, and the alternative, pretending you haven't, seems like a worse choice. She looked up. He was standing a few feet away with the jar of preserves still in his hand, and the expression of a man who has been surprised by something he thought he was prepared for and found the preparation insufficient. "Hi," she said. "Hi." There was a moment, not an awkward one. Exactly. Awkward implies a social failure, a misalignment of expectation. And this was something different. It was the particular quality of two people standing at the intersection of a shared history and a present that has grown separately, feeling the gap and finding it both wider and less terrible than expected. "The market," he said. "Rhubarb." He looked at the stalks in her hand. "For the Vale seasonal tart," she said, still working out the ratio. He nodded. "I read about the opening in March." "Yeah." "The review in the Times was." "I know." She had not been able to read the review without her hand shaking slightly, which she had not told anyone, because it seemed like an embarrassing response to a very good review. But her hands had shaken, and she had stood in the kitchen reading it 3 times. "It was a good day. You deserved it." She looked at him. He said it without the weight of someone trying to communicate something additional, without the particular cargo of a man using a compliment as a vehicle for something else. It landed flat and clean and simply meant what it said. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. A woman pushed a stroller past them, and the market did its Saturday thing around them. Noise and color, and the specific gregarious energy of people interacting with food in season. And they stood in the middle of it for a moment that was not quite comfortable and not quite uncomfortable, and had no existing category. "I'm in Brooklyn now," he said. It came out like an offering of information rather than a bid for response. "A place in Cobble Hill, 3rd floor. That's good. I'm working on a hotel project in the Catskills. Small." He paused. "Normal." She looked at him. "I'm trying to understand what that means," he said with a self-awareness that was not performed and not packaged as a charming quality. Just a man saying an accurate thing about himself. "Normal. I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it." "That sounds like a good project," she said. He looked at her for a moment, just looked without trying to do anything with the looking. "The trademark," he said, "and the Kessler royalties and the promenade credit. I want you to know that wasn't. I'm not telling you because I want credit for it. I'm telling you because I need you to know that I knew. Once I actually looked at it, I knew what it was and I knew how it happened and I knew what it cost you." "I know," she said. "Harriet told me." "Then you know it came with nothing attached to it." "I know." He nodded, looked at the rhubarb in her hand, back at her. "I'm not asking," he said, "for anything. I want to be clear about that. I'm not standing here as the beginning of something. I saw you and I thought that pretending I didn't see you was something I was done with. Pretending things aren't what they are." Serena looked at him for a long moment, long enough to be honest, which required looking at more than his face, looking at the jacket she didn't know, the tote bag, the person who had been somewhere she wasn't for 7 months doing the work of becoming someone she hadn't yet met. "You look different," she said. "I am different," he said, "I think. I'm not sure how yet. That's honest. I'm working on that too." She almost smiled. "Not quite. How's your mother?" she said. Something moved across his face, surprise, and then a kind of softening that was not quite sadness and not quite relief. "She's fine. She doesn't understand what I've done, but she's fine." "Does it matter that she doesn't understand?" "Not the way it used to." She nodded. The market moved around them. "I should get the rhubarb to a cold place," she said. "Right." She moved the stalks from one hand to the other. He put the jar of preserves back on the table. He wasn't buying it, had never been buying it, had just been holding it in the way of someone who needed something in their hands to anchor themselves in an unexpected moment. Serena. She looked at him. "I hope it's everything," he said. "The veil. I hope it's everything you wrote down on that notepad." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about October, the cold floor, the word inevitable that she had found instead of possible. She thought about March, 40 people in a room, the almond croissants her mother had assessed with professional exactness, the butter tarts gone by 6:30. She thought about the notebook on her kitchen counter at home with its current pages, full of ratios and seasonal ingredients and lease extension calculations, and the name of a supplier in Vermont who had the specific variety of apples she wanted for October. She thought about the 7 words she had written on a piece of paper and left on a vanity in a hotel suite on the day she had decided. "Most of it," she said honestly, still working on some of it. He nodded. She picked up a 4th stalk of rhubarb, which she did not strictly need, and added it to her basket anyway. "Take care of yourself, Damien," she said. "You too." She walked to the next table, which had strawberries. She didn't look back, not because it didn't mean something. It meant exactly what it was, which was significant and unresolved and human and not clean, but because she had somewhere to be, and the somewhere was forward. And she had practiced forward for 7 months with the specific dedication of a woman who understood that you do not rebuild yourself by looking in the direction of the demolition. She bought the strawberries. She calculated rhubarb to strawberry ratios in her head on the way home, testing combinations, discarding the ones that didn't hold, circling the one that did with the precision of someone who has learned to tell the difference between a thing that almost works and a thing that is actually right. The seasonal tart went on the menu in June. Rhubarb and strawberry, with a custard that was barely sweet and an almond crust that her mother had helped her get right in the 3rd week of testing. Serena priced it carefully. She had learned in the months of running the Veil that pricing was not just arithmetic, but communication. It told people what the work was worth and trained them to value it accordingly. And she had priced everything at the Veil to communicate that what happened in this kitchen was serious work done by a person who knew its value. The tart sold out in the 1st week. She made a note, adjusted the quantity, kept the price. On the Wednesday of the 2nd week, a woman came in alone at 11 o'clock in the morning and sat at the small table by the window and ordered the tart and ate it with the focused attention of someone who was actually tasting rather than just consuming. And when she finished, she asked to speak to the owner. Serena came out from the kitchen with flour on her left forearm that she forgot to wipe off until she was already at the table. The woman was perhaps 65, elegantly dressed without being showy, with the kind of face that had earned its lines over time and wore them without apology. She had a business card in front of her on the table. "I represent a culinary investment group," the woman said. "We're interested in supporting independent pastry concepts that have regional expansion potential. We don't take controlling stakes. We don't rebrand. We provide capital and distribution infrastructure, and then we leave the creative direction entirely with the owner." Serena looked at the card. She looked at the woman. She thought about Harriet's office in October and the word inevitable and the floor under her palm in day 1. "Tell me more," she said. She sat down. The flour was still on her left forearm. She didn't notice, and it didn't matter. That fall, on a Saturday in October, exactly 1 year from the morning she had burned her toast and taken a ride share to the most important departure of her life, Serena Vale stood outside the Vale Pastry House before it opened and looked at her name on the glass door. Vale, just that one word, her name, in clean letters that let the light through at the right angle. She was not thinking about the year that had preceded this moment. She had thought about it extensively and with considerable honesty in the months of its unfolding, and she had come to the understanding that it did not require continuous revisitation, that you could carry a thing, acknowledge its weight, and still put it down when you needed your hands free. She was thinking about the apple tart on the menu for this week, the Vermont supplier's delivery arriving at 7 o'clock, the new hire starting Monday, who had graduated from culinary school in June and who had the particular quality of someone who works hard because they love the work and not because they need the approval. She was thinking about the investment meeting next Thursday and the question of whether expansion meant a second location or a wholesale arrangement with 2 hotels upstate, and which of those options preserved the thing that made the Veil the Veil. She was thinking about calling her mother tonight. She was thinking about the almond croissant lamination, which was still not exactly right, and which she had accepted might remain a work in progress indefinitely, which was fine, because a work in progress was a thing with a future. She took out her keys, unlocked the door, went inside. The kitchen was clean and cold and waiting, the way kitchens are in the early morning before the warmth builds from the ovens and the work begins. And she stood in it for a moment in the specific silence of a space that is hers, fully, legally, unambiguously, on paper and in every room. And she breathed it in, the cold and the clean and the faint residual sweetness that lived permanently in the walls now baked in. Then she turned on the ovens. She tied her apron. she began.